"You're lucky we even invited you," my sister said, raising her glass. "Somebody has to keep you from sitting home alone again." The table laughed, not loud, just enough for me to feel it land. I looked down at my plate instead of at her. Liliana always knew exactly where to aim. Not at what I did for a living, not at what I owned, at the fact that I was 31, single, and living alone, and she'd decided that made me something to feel sorry for in front of a room full of people I barely knew. "I'm serious," she went on, leaning toward Daniel's business partners like she was letting them in on a joke. "Kylene hasn't brought anyone to a family dinner in 3 years. We stopped asking." More laughing. Someone at the end of the table, a woman I'd met 20 minutes earlier, actually said "aw" like I was a stray animal somebody had taken in. I set my napkin down and stood up. "Oh, come on," Liliana said, rolling her eyes. "Don't do the dramatic exit thing. It was a joke." I didn't answer her. I walked out of that private room without touching my food, and behind me I heard Daniel mutter, "Sensitive much?" I made it to the hallway before my hands started shaking, not from anger, from the specific kind of humiliation that only works because it comes from someone who's supposed to know you better than anyone else. Strangers can't hurt you like that. Family can, because they know exactly which door to walk through. This wasn't new. Liliana had been doing this since we were kids, just smaller. At 16, she told my first boyfriend I still slept with a nightlight, in front of him, laughing the whole time. At my college graduation, she told my aunt I barely passed when I graduated with honors, because it made a better story to tell. At Thanksgiving 2 years ago, she brought up, unprompted in front of everyone, that I'd been dumped by text message, and laughed like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all year. I never said anything back, not because I didn't have anything to say, because every time I did, I became the one who can't take a joke, and she stayed the fun one, the confident one, the one everyone liked being around. Tonight was supposed to be different. It was my 31st birthday dinner. My parents planned it. Liliana insisted on inviting Daniel's business partners because she said it would be good for me to be around successful people for once. I should have known what that meant. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Mom. "Are you seriously leaving?" she said the second I picked up. No hello. "Liliana went through a lot of trouble planning this." I humiliated me in front of strangers, on my own birthday. She was joking, Kylene. You always take things so personally. I stood there in that hallway, phone against my ear, and something in me went very still. Not angry, just done. I'm not coming back to that table. Don't be ridiculous. It's your party. It stopped being my party the second she made it about how pathetic I am. I'm leaving. I hung up before she could answer, and I stood there for a second in the quiet of that hallway, listening to the muffled laughter still coming behind the door. My birthday dinner, my family, and somehow I was the one standing outside it alone while they kept laughing without me. I didn't know it yet, but that walk out of the restaurant wasn't going to be the end of anything. It was the last time I was going to let Liliana make me the joke and just take it quietly. By the time I got to my car, my phone was already buzzing again. Not Mom this time. A text from a name I hadn't heard from in almost 2 years. My ex, Leo Hawkins, sent to a family group chat I didn't even know Liliana had added him to. "Happy birthday, Kylene. Heard tonight was rough. Liliana filled me in." I sat in my car for 10 minutes before I even started the engine, staring at that text from Leo. "Heard tonight was rough. Liliana filled me in." Liliana hadn't even let me get to my car before she started telling people. I drove home with the radio off, and by the time I got upstairs and locked my door behind me, I'd already made up my mind not to open that group chat. I made it 4 minutes before I opened it anyway. 22 messages. From cousins, from an aunt I saw twice a year, from people who weren't even at the dinner. "Liliana, Kaylin stormed out of her own birthday dinner tonight, lol. Dramatic as always." "Aunt Carol, "Oh no, is she okay?" Liliana: "She's fine, just doesn't like being the center of attention unless it's about her being sad. I invited some really successful people tonight and she couldn't handle it." Daniel: "In her defense, the vibe got a little intense. Ha." Liliana: "It was one joke about her being single. She needs thicker skin." I read that last one twice. One joke. Not the boyfriend at 16, not the graduation lie, not Thanksgiving. Just tonight, reduced down to something small enough that I'd look unreasonable for leaving. My phone rang while I was still staring at the screen. Leo: "I almost didn't pick up. 2 years since we broke up, and the only reason he still had my number was because neither of us ever bothered deleting it." "Hey," he said, careful, like he wasn't sure this call was a good idea either. "I saw the group chat. You okay?" "I'm fine," I said, which wasn't true, but it's what you say. "Liliana made it sound like you had some kind of meltdown." "I stood up and left a restaurant. That's it. That's the meltdown." He was quiet for a second. "For what it's worth, I remember exactly how she used to talk about you. I never liked it." That stopped me for a second, because in 2 years, nobody in my family had ever said that out loud. "You never said anything back then?" "No," he admitted. "I should have. I figured it wasn't my place." I sat down on the edge of my bed, phone against my ear, and for the first time all night, I let myself actually feel how tired I was. Not angry tired, just tired the way you get after holding something up for years and finally putting it down for a second. "Why did you text me tonight? We haven't talked in 2 years." "Honestly, I saw what she wrote and it made me angry on your behalf. Figured you should know somebody outside that group chat saw it for what it actually was." "And what was it?" "Cruel," he said simply, "dressed up as a joke so nobody has to feel bad about laughing." I didn't say anything for a second, because hearing somebody else name it plainly without me having to convince them first did something I wasn't ready for. "I should go," I said, before it did any more than that. "Yeah, okay. Kaylin, happy birthday, for real." I hung up and sat there in the quiet of my apartment, phone in my lap, group chat still glowing with new messages I didn't open. My own mother hadn't texted since our phone call, not to check on me, not to say anything at all. I finally opened my messages and typed one text to Liliana directly, not the group. "One joke? You've been doing this since we were kids. Tonight was the first time I walked away from it." 3 dots appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then appeared again. Her reply came through less than a minute later, and it wasn't an apology. "Don't make this a whole thing, Kaylin. Mom already thinks you're being dramatic. Don't give her a reason to say I told her so." I read that twice, because buried in it was something Liliana hadn't meant to say out loud, that this wasn't the first time she and my mother had talked about me behind my back, deciding in advance which version of me they'd believe. I put the phone down, and it buzzed again almost immediately. Not Liliana, not Leo. "Mom, your father and I need to talk to you tomorrow, in person. It's important." 3 words that never meant anything good in this family. It's important. I almost didn't go. I sat in my car outside my parents' house for a solid 5 minutes, replaying that text. It's important. With Mom, important usually meant something had already been decided, and I was just being told, not asked. Dad answered the door, which was unusual enough on its own. He barely said anything, just stepped aside and nodded toward the living room where Mom was already sitting, hands folded in her lap like she'd rehearsed this. "Sit down," she said. I stayed standing. "I'll stand." She sighed, the exact sigh she used on the phone last night. "We need to talk about what happened at your birthday dinner. Liliana humiliated me in front of strangers. That's what happened. She's already apologized for the joke. What we want to talk about is how you handled it, storming out like that in front of Daniel's business partners. Do you understand how that looked?" I actually laughed once without meaning to. How it looked. That's what you're worried about? "Kylene, Dad's voice, quiet from the doorway. Let your mother finish. Mom continued like I hadn't said anything. This isn't the first time you've made a scene over something small. Ever since you were a teenager, you've had this habit of taking things too personally and then punishing everyone around you for it. Taking things too personally? I repeated. She told my ex-boyfriend I slept with a nightlight in front of him. She told Aunt Carol I barely passed college when I graduated with honors. She brought up being dumped by text at Thanksgiving in front of everyone and laughed. And last night, on my birthday, she told a table full of strangers I'm too pathetic to bring anyone home. Which one of those was me taking things too personally? Mom's jaw tightened. That was years of context you're bringing up now to make one joke sound worse. It's not context, it's a pattern. You just never noticed because it was never aimed at you. That's not fair. None of this has been fair, I said, and my voice cracked slightly on the last word, which I hated because I didn't want to sound like I was breaking in front of her. Your sister she is. She loves you. Maybe, but loving someone and constantly making them small in front of other people aren't the same thing. I don't think you've ever let yourself see the difference because it's easier not to. Dad hadn't said much this whole time, standing near the doorway with his arms crossed, but now he spoke, and something in his tone was different than Mom's, careful, almost tired. Your mother and I actually didn't ask you here just about last night, Dad said. Mom shot him a look, fast, like he'd said something before she was ready. What do you mean? I asked. Dad glanced at Mom, and for a second neither of them said anything, which told me whatever this was, it had been decided before I walked in the door. Your sister and Daniel are having some problems, financial ones. Your mother thought, given everything, this might be a good time for the family to come together and help however we can. I stood there for a second, letting that land. You brought me here the day after my sister humiliated me at my own birthday dinner to ask me to help her? Nobody said anything about asking you to help her financially, Mom said quickly. We just think, as a family, say it, I said. Just say what you actually mean. Mom hesitated, and in that hesitation I already knew. We think it would mean a lot if you reached out to her, offered some support, financially if you're in a position to. I felt something in my chest go very still, the same stillness from the hallway outside the restaurant the night before. You want me to apologize to her and then help pay for whatever mess she and Daniel are in? Nobody said anything about apologize, Mom said quickly. You didn't have to, I said. That's what this whole conversation has been. I looked at them both, my father not meeting my eyes now, my mother still trying to smooth this into something reasonable, and I understood, clearly, for maybe the first time, that this had never been about my birthday, or the joke, or even Liliana's problems. It was about which one of us they were always going to protect first. I need to think, I said, and turned toward the door. Kylene, Mom called after me, we're not done talking about this. I am, I said, and walked out. I made it to my car before my phone buzzed. Liliana, Mom told me you're being difficult about helping us. Seriously? After everything, you're going to make this about you again? I stared at that message for a long time before I realized what it actually meant. Liliana already knew. She'd known before I even walked into that house, which meant this whole conversation had never been a request. It had been an ambush she helped plan. I didn't text back. I drove straight to Liliana's house instead, because if this had been planned, I wanted to hear her say it to my face. She opened the door already annoyed, like I was the inconvenience. Mom said you stormed out over there too. You knew, I said, not moving from the porch. Before I even walked into their living room, you already knew what they were going to ask me about. Liliana crossed her arms. So what if I did? So you let them ambush me. The day after you humiliated me at my own birthday dinner, you helped plan a conversation where I was supposed to apologize to you and hand over money. Nobody said you had to apologize. You're right, I said. Mom just implied it so gently that I was supposed to fill in the rest myself. Same as always. She rolled her eyes and stepped back, leaving the door open, which I took as permission to come in. Her living room looked exactly like it always did. Expensive, staged, like it belonged in a magazine nobody actually reads. Daniel wasn't there. You want to know the truth? Liliana said, dropping onto the couch. Fine. Daniel and I are behind on the house. Have been for months. When Mom found out, she panicked, and I told her maybe you could help, because you're the only one who never spends money on anything. What was I supposed to do? Not mention it? You could have asked me yourself, instead of sending Mom to soften me up first. Would you have said yes if I asked you myself? I didn't answer right away, and the silence between us said more than I wanted it to. That's what I thought, she said, almost smug, like she'd proven something. You made me the joke at my own birthday dinner, in front of Daniel's business partners. Then you told the entire family group chat it was one small joke and I overreacted. Then you helped Mom set up a conversation where I was supposed to just quietly forgive you and bail you out in the same breath. Do you hear how that sounds? You're twisting it, she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. I'm not twisting anything. I'm just finally saying it out loud instead of swallowing it like I always do. She looked away, toward the window, and for a second I thought maybe this was the moment, the one where she actually heard me instead of managing me. Then she said, "You've always been jealous of me, ever since we were kids. Maybe this is just easier for you than admitting that." I felt that land somewhere old, somewhere from years ago, and for a second I almost believed it, the way you do when someone says something about you enough times. Then I thought about the nightlight, the graduation, Thanksgiving, last night. Every single time she made herself bigger by making me smaller and called it a joke when I flinched. "No," I said quietly, "I was never jealous of you, Liliana. I just spent 30 years hoping you'd eventually be kind to me without me having to ask." She didn't say anything to that. "I'm not giving you money. Not because I don't care if you lose the house, because every time I've bent for you, you've used it as proof that I'll always bend. I'm done being the sister you can hurt in public and still count on in private." "So that's it?" she said, standing up now, voice rising. "You're just done? Over one dinner?" "It was never one dinner, you know that. You've just never had to care before." I turned to leave, and she called after me, sharper now. "Mom's never going to forgive you for this." I stopped at the frame, hand on the door, and looked back at her. "Maybe not," I said, "but at least I'll know exactly where I stand instead of guessing every time I walk into a room with this family." I walked out and got in my car, and for the first time since the restaurant, I didn't feel like crying. I felt something steadier than that, something closer to clarity. My phone buzzed once I was on the road. "Mom, your father and I are very disappointed in how you handled things today." I read it at a red light, and instead of the guilt I expected to feel, I felt something smaller, quieter, almost like relief. I typed back 4 words and didn't wait for a reply before I put the phone down. "I know. I'm okay with that." I didn't hear from Mom for 3 days after that text. No calls, no messages, nothing in the family group chat with my name in it, which told me they were probably still talking about me, just not to me. I spent those 3 days doing something I hadn't done in years, nothing that involved managing anyone else's feelings. I went to work, I came home, and I sat with the quiet. Instead of filling it with guilt over a phone I wasn't checking every 10 minutes. On the fourth day, Dad called, not Mom. Dad, who almost never calls on his own. "Can I come by?" he asked, and something in his voice was different than it had been in that living room, smaller, less rehearsed. He showed up an hour later, standing in my doorway like he wasn't sure he was welcome, which, fairly, he wasn't sure of either. "Your mother doesn't know I'm here," he said. I let him in anyway. He sat on my couch, hands on his knees, and for a while he didn't say anything. I didn't fill the silence for him this time. I'd spent enough years doing that. "I've been thinking about what you said," he finally told me, "about which one of you we always protected first. And?" "You were right," he said, not looking at me. "I've watched Liliana do this to you since you were girls. Small things mostly, things easy enough to laugh off, so I did. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself you were tougher than you looked, so it didn't matter as much." "It mattered," I said quietly. "I know that now," he said. "I think I've known it for a long time and just found it easier not to say anything. It was simpler to let your mother handle things her way. Liliana needed less from us. You never asked for anything, so we assumed you didn't need anything either." I felt my throat tighten, because hearing that, plainly, without an excuse folded into it, was something I hadn't let myself expect. "I'm not asking you to fix it. I don't think that's something you can undo after 30 years. "No," he agreed, "but I can stop pretending I didn't see it. That's something at least." We sat there for a while after that, not saying much, and it wasn't uncomfortable the way silences with my family usually were. It felt like the first honest quiet I'd had with either of my parents in years. Before he left, he stopped at the door. "Your mother still thinks you owe Liliana an apology." "I know." "I don't think you do," he said. "I wanted you to hear that from me, even if I can't say it to her yet." After he left, I sat by my window for a long time, phone in my hand, not checking it, just holding it. Eventually, I opened my messages and found Leo's name still sitting there from my birthday night. "Thank you for saying something that night. You were the only person outside this family who called it what it actually was." He replied within a few minutes, "Anytime. For what it's worth, I think you handled all of this better than anyone gave you credit for." I didn't answer right away. I just sat there, letting that settle, because for the first time in longer than I could remember, someone had described me as handling something well, instead of handling it too emotionally, too dramatically, too much. Liliana texted me once more that week. Not an apology, not really, just, "I hope you're happy breaking this family apart over one dinner." I looked at it for a long moment, then set the phone down without answering. I wasn't the one who broke anything. I'd just stopped holding it together by myself, quietly, in the background, while everyone else got to be the version of themselves they wanted to be, at my expense, dressed up as love. 31 years old, and for the first time, I wasn't waiting for anyone in that family to notice what it cost me to keep showing up for them. I finally understood the difference between being needed and being respected, and I wasn't willing to keep settling for the first one just because it was easier for everyone else.